So this is the first cell we're doing right here. This is the southernmost point of the project, just a block north of Cedar. And it's country homes from Cedar all the way up to Division. There's, I think, 18 cells, and we're going to be doing work in 14 of them. So this was planted in 2014. I looked it up because I was curious. And the idea was really great. If you remember what was here before, it was absolutely atrocious. It was either concrete or asphalt, I don't remember, and it was just a ditch that caught all the water that ran off a 5-mile hill. And it would catch in there, and then it would drain down to a pipe where it went wherever it went to be treated. But it would sit there, and it was just mosquito city, and it was ugly. So the county put this in with all this filtration stuff, and it directs the water where the water's supposed to go. And it's really awesome, except that the people that planted the plants, like half of the trees are planted too deep. A lot of them are either dead now or struggling, and you could tell that they were planted wrong. I think the plants were put in way too dense, and they competed with each other, and they just didn't do well. And then on top of that, the people that have been hired to maintain this just haven't done a good job. They were guys that were doing a job, and they didn't really know what they were doing. So you got all these dead trees and everything. You've got all of this mowed stuff. Those are just weeds that rather than pulling out or even spraying, they just mowed them. So, this is supposed to be the main focal point of the project with those signs. It looks absolutely atrocious because it's full of dead plants and weeds. The idea was fantastic. It was supposed to be an example of an ecologically sustainable landscape and how beautiful and good for the environment that can be, but it does need to be maintained to some degree, and it just kind of hasn't been yet. So I'm really hoping I get the maintenance contract next year, because we will fix all of this. Here's another cell right here on the other side of wall, and then this, and then the very end ones by Division is what we're working on. This is just grass with trees. There's no tree rings, so the lawnmowers keep hitting the trees and, girdling them, which that's how it's been done. But I don't mow lawns, so I did not want to take that part of the contract. This will still be open for another company, but I can keep an eye on it and let the county know if there is a problem that needs to be addressed. And now that I have the contact information for them, I absolutely will. So here's the last cells. These ones are awful. They're just so steep. Working in these is going to be a bit of a nightmare. Tens of thousands of cars drive past this every day, and they get to see this. I'm pretty sure cleaning up trash is part of the maintenance contract. That's not being done either. How this came to be is I was driving up country homes, and as I was driving up, almost getting to Wall, I saw some guys driving those big industrial lawnmowers around that swale, and I saw them literally run down, mow over a Joe Pye weed. Big, gorgeous, 5-foot-tall perennial in full bloom and probably covered with bees before they went phew right over it. I said a few expletives in the car, I'm pretty sure. I pulled over, I got out of the car and crossed the street, and as kindly as I could muster, because inside I was absolutely broiling, I asked them, "What you doing?" And they just said, "Oh, we're just mowing the weeds." And I said, again, as kindly as I could handle, because I was really having a hard time holding it together, "Joe Pye weed is not a weed. Just because the word weed's in the name doesn't mean it's a weed." He was like, "Oh, well, this is just what our boss told us to do." I was like, I was going to ask who's your boss, but I could see the logo on their shirt. I knew who their company was. And I said, "Well, who hired you?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And I realized that these two kind, polite gentlemen had no idea what they were actually doing as far as what the goal was or what the plants were or anything along those lines. And I wasn't going to get anywhere with these guys. So I started calling, and I spent about the next 30 to 45 minutes on the phone. I started with 311, called the city, asked who is in charge of the country homes corridor. Who do I talk to about this? Because there's an urgent thing happening right now. There's these guys mowing over the Joe Pye weed. This is not okay. Well, the city told me this isn't actually city property. This is county property. It's literally right on the other side of the city line. Okay, so who do I talk to there? Got bounced around a few times. I finally landed at the public works department. And I was talking to a gentleman who was very wonderful. He said he didn't actually know much about the plants. He is in charge of the corridor, but he doesn't know the plants. So he's going to transfer me to Ashley, who knows the plants, but she's in the field right now. So she probably won't get back to me until tomorrow. I'm like, that's fine. At this point, the damage is done. Hopefully they don't mow over any other Joe Pye weed, but there it is. Well, she called me back in about 15 minutes. And she kind of did one of those, tell me the story, what happened? And I told her what I saw. And she said, yeah, they're not supposed to be mowing over the Joe Pye weed. They're supposed to be mowing the invasive sedge that's growing in there, but they weren't supposed to mow the Joe Pye weed. And I said, well, they just mowed the Joe Pye weed and it's all gone. And she's like, okay, let me make a phone call. And I said, can you please call me back afterwards? She said, yes, absolutely. Their mowing totally controlled the sedge. This was their target. This is yellow nut sedge, which is invasive in our area. They were trying to mow it before it went to seed. Fine. Would have been more effective to just pull it up, but whatever. It's not a hard weed to get. Literally that's the low roots. Pull this up 2 or 3 times, you'd have the whole roof. You'd have all of it. But they didn't want to do that. They mowed it instead. Anyway. This is what's left of that Joe Pye weed. It doesn't even look like Joe Pye weed anymore. But they just left it. They mowed over it and they left it. This one and that one. So she calls me back a few minutes later, and she says, yeah, they said that the sedge was so thick in there that they couldn't mow it without mowing the Joe Pye weed, but that really isn't what they were supposed to do. And I said, yeah, I can imagine. And I asked, how do I get this contract? Like, I own a little garden maintenance company. I would love to do this and make it gorgeous. How do I get this maintenance job? And she told me, she said, I have to be on their preferred vendors list, have to fill out the thing, go through these steps. And I said, will you send me how to do that? Send me the link. No problem. So she sent me the link. I filled it out. About a week later, she sends me an email and asks me if I would be interested in bidding on the removal of the dead plants. Just removal, that's all. But would I be interested? Yes, absolutely. Please send me the map. I will be happy to place a bid to take these out. There were several trees on the list, so I thought I'd better call Alan because I don't want to be taking out trees, but Alan can do trees. And I checked with her to make sure that I can subcontract and all that. And so I contacted Alan. He was thrilled. Absolutely, I want to help you with this job. What do we do? I said, I think first we should walk the corridor so we can really see what needs to be done, try to figure out what plants are what needs to come out, and figure out our bids. And he said, yeah, let's do that. So we met and we walked the corridor, and there were so many questions after walking it that I sent another email to Ashley for clarification, and she offered to walk it with us. Yes, please. So we got to walk it with her, and while we were walking up and down that corridor with her, we got to point out all these things that were not maintained well. Like, she knew the plants, and she knew that it didn't look good. But she wasn't aware of several of the things, like the specifics, like the irrigation next to the tree, because apparently the company that has the irrigation contract is insisting that that is how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to have irrigation right around the base of the tree. Why? That doesn't do any good. So I was really glad to have Alan there as a 40-year arborist backing me up on this, going, that is not correct. They need to remove that. Things like that. We got to point out the bad pruning cuts. We got to point out this is not how this is done. We showed her several patches of weeds that she hadn't been aware of before. The maintenance contract is supposed to cover that stuff. This company that maintains it is supposed to be pulling the weeds, but they're literally just mowing the weeds and then leaving the mess. And when they hedge the trees and the shrubs, they just leave the mess. They're not even cleaning up after themselves. So we get to have a wonderful talk while we walked up Country Homes. So we submitted the bid. We waited until the deadline. I was sitting on the edge of my seat, and it was 3 days later before I heard anything. that we had in fact been awarded the contract. Yay! So I'm super stoked about that. This is another one that's going to be taken out purely because it should have never been planted here in the first place. It's blocking the visibility of the sign, which defeats the purpose of having the sign. These are supposed to explain how this system works. When it rains, the water runs off the road and house roofs and everything else. It comes down into this, essentially a drainage ditch, and it percolates down and recharges the groundwater. It goes into the systems that purify the water, and then it comes back to our houses as drinking water. It's a good system. It's just not as pretty as it's supposed to be. There's this whole row of trees that was planted right here, and several of them are completely dead, broken, gone. There's two that are still standing, but are dying. And there's whole other rows of trees with the same problem. There's two things that have happened to the trees here. One is they get hit by cars all the time. Traffic comes off the road and it hits the trees. The other thing that's happened many, many times to a lot of the trees on this road is that they were planted wrong. They were planted too deep, or the root ball was never disturbed. Several trees have just fallen over because they've rotted completely at the base, and then they just fell over because that's what's going to happen if there's no roots. And others have just struggled. There's some rot going on, or they just failed to thrive because they were planted incorrectly. And there's also the maintenance that's been done incorrectly, bad pruning, and the irrigation lines that are right up next to the trunks. The trunks do not need water. The water needs to be where the drip line is. You notice how a lot of the roots are still in a pot shape? Some managed to escape, but there's still a lot in here that are girdling, twisting, spinning. So you can tell that this plant, when it was put in, they just popped it out of the pot and stuck it in the ground. They didn't give any care to the roots at all. Is that flower? Not supposed to be here. Not at all. Somebody should have dug this up. So when Ashley asked me if I would like to place a bid on this project, I said absolutely yes, but there was some tree removal in there, which is a little bigger than I usually do. So I asked my friend Alla, who is a 40-plus year master arborist, if he'd like in on this project with me, and he jumped on it. He was so excited to help. Absolutely, he'd love to do it. So we walked this strip together, and we kept seeing these trees marked with survey tape, but we couldn't figure out why some trees were marked and others weren't. It didn't seem to fit with utility pruning, although that was our best guess. Some of them looked healthy, some of them looked dead. Were they slated for removal? No idea. So I asked Ashley, and she said, yeah, those ones are supposed to be pruned, and that's going to be done next week, whatever that was. Well, I happened to drive past, and I saw the guys who were pruning the trees, and I could see the bad cuts from the street. And I messaged Alan, and I told him, dude, you are going to have an aneurysm when you see these cuts. And no kidding, he about fainted on sight when he saw some of these. So check this out. Every cut here leaves a stub on the tree. It's not straight with the branch bark collar. It's not even flush with the trunk. What were they even thinking? They're also ragged. Like you can see the messed up edges. It looks like they cut it with a chainsaw, and it must have had a dull blade. They get no idea. And then, why were these branches hot, but these dead ones not cut? I don't even know what the goal of this pruning was. Like, why were they pruning the trees? My best guess is that all the cuts are facing this direction, so they were probably trying to make street clearance. But that's a guess. I'm not sure, because the actual goal of pruning is not clear. The other thing that drives both of us nuts about this planting is this right down here. There are no roots right here. Trees do not need irrigation on their trunks. Trees need irrigation by their drip lines where the roots are. These are so tight that it's curdling the tree and cutting into the bark. I can't even get my fingers under there. So, unnecessary and should have been removed about a year after planting if it was installed at all. It's not really needed. So this whole row of really sad-looking shrubs used to be Miss Kim lilacs. Miss Kims are a dwarf variety of lilac. They're supposed to stay small. They're not supposed to be hedged. And anybody that knows plants would know that. But these have been hedged many times, year after year, and it's no surprise that they're showing this kind of damage now. These have never bloomed because they have always been hedged after the buds have set, which physically removes the buds and doesn't give them the chance to bloom. And now look at the, 2, 3 of them in this row. The vast majority of other rows, they're all dead. Of the few that aren't dead, most of them are diseased. Alan told me about this. I forget the details of it, but it has to do with, it's mostly weather caused. But that's what's causing this discoloration on the leaves. This tree will do well, but it wasn't planted. These ones that are leaning like this were pretty much all hit by cars. Spiraling roots. So were never corrected when they were planted. So this is actually a mite. I can't pronounce it, but it's like erythiid or erythiid or something mite, which lays its eggs inside the leaf tissue, and then the eggs, when they hatch, they secrete a chemical that makes the leaf grow around them like this. So they literally force the plant to make them a house. And they complete their larval and pupal stages in here, and then they emerge as adults. Which is fine. This is what's supposed to happen. In an ecologically sustainable landscape, you're supposed to have insects. So I'm not worried about this, actually. What I'm more worried about is using the fragrant sumac in a place that gets irrigation, because it does this, where it just takes over. It doesn't need irrigation, and by giving it extra water, you're just letting it go crazy, and it's choking everything else out. It also has some allelopathic tendencies, which means it secretes its own herbicide for its roots to reduce competition. And it is actually outcompeting most of the plants in these whole swales. So I love it. I think it's beautiful, but I don't think it needs to be watered. Sumac choking this out. It's out competing. So these trees along this last stretch get hit by cars all the time. This one was hit recently, and there's the evidence. So these that are dying or dead are slated for removal. Alan will be taking these out. I'm not entirely sure what these used to be. They were either dogwood shrubs or lilacs. I think these ones were dogwoods, but they are no more. So these are all coming out. So these grasses, I was really worried about taking out because grasses often have really deep roots. That's going to be a lot easier than I expected. So these are Korean firs, which were chosen because they're somewhat drought tolerant. The problem is they are not at all salt tolerant. So these are all struggling because of the salts used on the roadways. And these are also slated for removal. Anything that looks even slightly dead That's Canada thistle. It's native, but it's a pain. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything and also have an accurate count of how many plants we removed. So I marked and counted everything in the cells ahead of the crews that were working there, and they double-checked my count as they worked. Each cell had a printout for these records. It's very green. Weeds. In several places, the fragrant sumac had completely outcompeted the lilacs. Those were especially difficult to get out because we had to first cut back the sumac to get it out of the way. They filled the fake truck 3 times, this is the 4th, the Chevy 3 times, and this is the 4th, and the trailer twice. Yeah. So the other company is down a bit farther, pruning. They said they were pruning while they were all holding gas-powered hedgers. I said, "You're not pruning, you're hedging." And they said, "Same thing." And I said, "No, it's not. It's not the same thing." So we finally made it all the way up Country Homes to Wall Street, and we're just in the other side of Wall now. The maintenance company has come through with their hedgers. They told me they were pruning. I said, you're not pruning, you're holding hedgers, you're hedging. And they said, same thing. I said, no, it's not the same thing. But whatever. Anyway, up here at the cell on Wall, they have religiously cut back every single one of the grasses. They did not miss a single one. It's the wrong time of year for that. They dutifully hedged all of the sumac, which, fine, you could make an argument for hedging that. But here's the really funny ones. This right here, that they ball hedged so nicely, is a cluster of weed grasses. It's a weed. They hedged it. Why? No. Hold on, let me show you another one. This tree behind me right here is a volunteer ash. It was not planted. It is a weed. The county asked me to go ahead and take it out because this would be easier to take out now than later. They hedged it. You don't hedge trees. That's not how this works. Why? I mean, we're going to take it out anyway. It's a weed. But why would you hedge that? In the meantime, like I said, they dutifully hedged the sumac. But they didn't cut down the salvia. The salvia is the one thing in this cell that actually probably should have been cut down, and they didn't bother. I am so confused. My head hurts right now. There are not enough face palms in the world. We were instructed not to do any weeding, only to remove the dead plants. I did remove a few weeds, though. This giant patch of catnip that was driving me nuts, several invasive and noxious weeds that were going to seed, especially bug loss. I removed them to prevent further spread. And this weed in the carrot family that I was concerned was poison hemlock. It turned out to be cow parsley, and completely harmless, but better safe than sorry. You can't be too careful with weeds in the carrot family. So poison hemlock, like I said earlier, can cause rashes, like contact dermatitis. It has a sap and that's where the toxins are. So none touched my skin, but I just want to be extra cautious because I've never dealt with that plant before, and I definitely don't want to find out the hard way that I have a really awful reaction to it. So I'm going to disinfect all the tools that I used, or at least wash them in the short term, wipe them down. All the clothes I'm wearing are going to go straight in the laundry as soon as I get home. With nothing else, like just these clothes, and probably clean the washing machine when I'm done with that. Yeah, that's a first for me.
All total, we removed over 1,200 dead and dying plants. We filled the large truck 14 times, the pickup truck 10 times, and the trailer 8.5 times. Unfortunately, we were not awarded the maintenance contract in 2025. The current contract still had 2 years left before it expired, and the county determined that they could not cancel the existing contract just to open up bids again. So keep your fingers crossed for us to get it in 2027.